Just do the next slide situation.
So you want me to do the slides?
That would be great. Thank you.
No problem.
Hey folks, welcome. We're so happy to have you here. If you're here to learn about building trust with families, you're in the right place. We'll let folks trickle in and we'll get started in just a few moments. Hey, Kimberly, I see that your hand is raised. If you have a question, do you want to pop that into the chat there? Hey folks, welcome. I see lots of people entering the webinar. We are Parent Powered and we're going to talk about building trust with families today. We'll get started in just another minute. We're letting everyone come in. I'm seeing a lot of folks I know. This is exciting. All right, folks, we are half past the hour, so we'll give it another 30 seconds before we get going. Thank you, Adam. Glad to see you are so excited. Yeah, and folks, feel free as we go through the webinar to go ahead and, utilize the chat as much as you need. Hi, Phyllis, welcome. All right, folks, so let's officially get started. Hello, all. Welcome to our second Communities of Practice webinar. We are so happy to have you here today. The parent-powered topic is building trust with families. And so I know that all of you have lots to think and say about that, and we cannot wait for a discussion later in the session. But to kick things off, I want to introduce myself. I'm Megan Gallagher. For those of you that don't know me, I'm the Director of Partner Success here at Parent Powered. And I work with a number of you to make sure that we are getting this program out to your families. And it's been such wonderful work we've done in the past 5 years. And I also have my colleague Rebecca on the line. Rebecca, do you want to quickly introduce yourself before we jump in?
Sure. I am Rebecca Honig, and I'm the Chief Content and Curriculum Officer at ParentPowered. So I work with a really wonderful team to craft our curricula across all ages and stages of development and write our messaging. And I'm really happy to be here. I've spent decades in education, both in the classroom and working across the country and the world in family engagement and all things related to kids and learning. So I'm really happy to be here with all of you today.
All right, thank you, Rebecca. All right, folks, to get things started, I want to pose a question to you. I am embarking on Friday night. My husband and I are going to a concert for a band that we really love, and that is the Dave Matthews Band. I've been following him for, let's see, since 2006-ish, so it's been a while. Go ahead and try to figure out my age there. But would love to know, as I embark on this concert on Friday night, would love to hear from you. What was your first concert? Think back to the way back. How old were you? What first concert did you go to? Go ahead and pop that into chat if you want. Rebecca, I don't know if you remember your first concert right off the bat. I definitely remember mine. It's very memorable.
I think my very, very first was Arlo Guthrie, actually, followed very quickly by Ray Charles.
Oh, Ray Charles. All right. Ooh,
Jackson
look at these
5, nice.
responses. We have Hillary Duff, the Beach Boys, Elvis Presley, Richard Marx, Ozfest. That is Panic at the Disco, Jackson 5, Jeff and Sherry
Police.
Easter.
Uh,
Wow. Ziggy Marley and the Melody Makers. I was 19. That is awesome. Dave Matthews Band. There we go, Joe. OJ's, Patti LaBelle, The Police, Jackson 5, Bad Religion, Run DMC. Love it. Look at these responses. Oh, I just realized I didn't even share mine. I was in a mere fourth grade when my parents scored tickets for me and my friends to go see New Kids on the Block. And so, yeah, that was my fourth grade year. You know, elementary was all about New Kids on the Block. So thanks for everyone for sharing. I hope that just, popped a smile on your face and gave you that great memory to carry with you throughout the day today. All right. Here we go, building trust with families. I'm going to hand it over to Rebecca, who's going to go through just a couple of slides. And then, like I said, we look forward to the discussion following the slides. So Rebecca, feel free to take it away.
yeah, we're really excited to dive into this topic with you, and it is entirely from you. So, for those of you who were on our last community of practice, we ended by saying, what do you want to talk about next time? We put up a number of topics, and building trust with families by far was the clear winner. So, we're going to dive into it today. And really, this is meant to be a discussion. I am a scripter. I like to know what I am going to say at every moment. And so I am challenging myself on this call with all of you to not script my words, but really to just be present and have a conversation. So it's a little scary for me. I'll go ahead and name that vulnerability. But one of the reasons I feel comfortable with it is that we just have so much expertise among all of you. So we're really excited to just elicit your thoughts as we go along. All right. So, real quickly, why trust with family, or why trust, right? Why is this so critical? And we all know it's critical, right? This information will not be probably new to any of you, but really and truly, homeschool partnerships simply can't happen without it. So critical is this sort of quality in a relationship between parents and caregivers and school that Dr. Karen Mapp recently, just a few years ago, revised the dual capacity framework for building family school partnerships to really put trust at the top. So when you look at those process conditions, you see trust right off the bat because it's just the critical ingredient of true partnership and reciprocal communication and collaboration. So today we're just going to talk about things we can kind of layer on to what we're already doing and strategies we can employ to really increase the likelihood that we are able to form trusting relationships with families. So if we go to the next slide, we'll just kind of look at our first strategy. So the first thing that we can all do is really follow and build upon the trust that is already in place, right? Families have relationships in the community. Newcomer families are oftentimes joining other family members or folks that they know from their home country. There will be representatives in your community who are holding those trusting relationships. So when you think about your community and the places that trust is already in place, go ahead and put some of those locations in the chat, right? Like, so what do you think of when you think of the trust holders in your community? And you might think about religious institutions, you might think about resettlement agencies. Another thing you might notice, and feel free to take your time, but as things occur to you, hospitals, absolutely, churches. What else? You may notice food banks, another place that people gather and have strong relationships. You may have local health clinics, YMCAs, sports organizations, libraries, I love it, physicians. So these are the existing trust holders. And we want to notice them because information that comes from those trust holders is going to be more trusted and relied upon by families, right? You are able to kind of ride the positivity of that existing relationship. So one thing we might ask ourselves is, what can we provide the existing trust holders with so that they can help to bridge the trust and the communication? So a perfect example might be if you've got orientation forms around registering families for school, make sure that those trust holders have those orientation forms, right? You might consider hosting a workshop with all of those trust holders around how to help families register for school, because oftentimes that's going to be a family's point of entry into your school or district. And you don't want them stumbling upon it on the internet, struggling to find the information. You want a physician or a faith leader or a resettlement agency or a friend to walk that family through the process. Another thing you might think about is creating some resources that some of your more informal trust holders can have. So an example, we're actually going to talk about tomorrow on a webinar we're giving around supporting newcomers. One of our presenters was talking about when she was a newcomer and it came time to register her daughter for school. She was very nervous about asking questions. She didn't know what district her daughter was in and didn't want to let other people know that she had this gap in knowledge because she felt ashamed. So she went to a birthday party, and there was a mother there that she really connected with, and she knew that that mother had a child who was already in school, and she sort of found a moment to go up to that mother and say, how do I get my child enrolled in school, right? So this is somebody who's uncomfortable seeking out a trusted relationship. And that mother was able to walk her through next steps. Well, what if that parent had a resource from you? For example, almost like a calling card, like, here's who you call to register for your child for school. Ask for Susan. Language supports are available if you need an interpreter. Say, X, Y, or Z. By giving these trusted sources resources to help bridge that connection, you're also honoring their knowledge and their position within the community as a trusted source of information. The other thing you can do is to up your own likelihood of being known and trusted in the community. So that might be attending local cultural events. Consider having a pop-up tent or an information station so that people can meet you in the places they're already comfortable going. Can you host a welcome to school night or an information session at a community center, at a health clinic, at a resettlement agency, because those are going to be locations where families are already comfortable going. The other thing you can consider is sharing your spaces and resources with those organizations so that they start coming to you. You probably have a photocopier if you're lucky. Many community-based organizations who are really entrenched in the community might not. So do you want to offer up your copier? Do you want to offer up your school gymnasium or your library for your community-based organizations to host events? What that's going to do is increase the likelihood that families are going to encounter your school or district in ways that are more comfortable and organic. Also, by forming those trusting relationships and partnerships with community-based organizations, these then become resources that you can rely on for things like translation services and interpreters. If you have other thoughts on sharing resources or places that you might go to really have visibility in areas where families are already comfortable, go ahead and pop those thoughts into the chat as we go on to the next strategy we can all try. All right, so the next thing we have here is building trust by building scaffolding. And as an educator, I know we are all oriented around the benefits of scaffolding education as it applies to children, but rarely do we talk about scaffolding for adults. And this is so critical because nothing is worse than feeling like there's something you should be doing and you don't have all the information or the support in order to do it. It really actually erodes trust. I know we've all had this experience, right? Like where someone says, oh, you just do this, it's easy, and you go to do it and it's hard. And it actually makes you feel like, well, I can't trust that person anymore. And I feel really bad about myself. So compounded, those two things really I think, serve to distance families from schools and districts. So I think what we want to do is we want to just like think for a minute about the early days, all the information you're giving to families, all the things you're asking families to do, right? Maybe you're asking them to sign up for a portal. Maybe you're asking them to drop their child off for the first time. Maybe you're asking them to register for services. These are all moments we want to pause and say, am I scaffolding this experience? Because the more supported families feel, the more they are going to trust the schools and the districts and eventually, right, the teachers in the classrooms. So we just put some things up here around like important areas to scaffold, right? We always want to scaffold with language supports. We always want to pull back the hood on our systems and how they work, right? What are logistics? What are the expectations? What are families' rights and responsibilities? Clarity on how you're going to communicate with families. Also being really explicit about around why it matters. You're going to partner with families, and this may be new for families, especially families who have not experienced strong family engagement and partnership in the past. So really letting them know what the benefits are, not just to their child, but also to the entire school community. These are all forms of scaffolding that we can utilize to really build comfort and ease so that our schools feel like welcoming places to families. And anytime you're sharing new information, if you have that moment of pausing and saying, okay, am I scaffolding this experience for the person who's receiving this information, for the family? Because the more scaffolding we can offer, the more trust we're going to build. All right. So one thing I just want to make sure we name here is we always want to make sure we're looking with a strength-based, trauma-informed lens when we think about building trust with families because, well, for many, many reasons, but oftentimes we may be starting from a place of distrust because we're basically inheriting families' previous experiences with educational systems and systems in general. So families may be coming to you with an inherent distrust. And so we have to sort of obviously acknowledge this, name this, and then work really hard to act against it. We had an interesting experience early on when we were building a custom program for a partner, and we gathered together the Parent Policy Council. And we were talking about the ways that families wanted to engage with their schools and districts. And families were coming up with so many wonderful activity ideas and suggestions. And we had been chatting for about an hour and a half when a woman raised her hand and said, you know, these ideas are great, but none of this is going to work because my kid's teacher doesn't like me. And all of a sudden, parents across the room were nodding, yeah, me too, that's happening to me too. So we totally paused our current conversation and we really invested in unpacking like what is happening to communicate this to you, to give you the feeling that the teacher doesn't like you. And so I started asking like, well, what happens right before you try to talk to the teacher? What happens when you try to talk to the teacher? And what came out of this conversation is actually that parents and caregivers had negative experiences early on in school. Then they went to bring their kids to school and they were attempting to connect with their children's teachers at drop off, which is, of course, when we're all busy setting up our classrooms, connecting with students, and we really have another focus, right? So we seem like we don't want to connect with parents, perhaps, because we actually can't do it very well in that moment. We are focused on something else. But for those families in this conversation, that was happening and they were deciding this means the teacher doesn't like me, right? So this was a situation where we really needed to unpack what is the right time to reach out? What are positive ways to start conversations? How can you reach the teacher? When are they available, right? Because when we layer on this understanding, we are kind of upping the chances that we're not going to re-traumatize families around their own negative experiences in education. There are also some things we can do some lightweight things we can do to humanize ourselves as educators and administrators. And we've popped some up here because these can be great trust builders. Megan, you started with one, which was an icebreaker, right? We didn't jump in and talk about education, talk about work. We started talking about bands that in concerts we went to. We took ourselves to like a sort of a communal place of remembering something. And what's so nice about this, I think, when we think about building trust with families, is there is that inherent sort of power dynamic, right, between parents and educators. Educators are often held up as the authorities. It can make us seem inapproachable or distant. So when we start with an icebreaker where we're all just talking about things that are familiar to us, that we all know about, we kind of create a level playing field and a kind of some early bonding moments. I don't know if you have icebreakers you love, but I would just welcome anyone to put icebreakers in the chat and we can kind of learn from each other. I think one thing as you're doing that, I'll say is that when we think about icebreakers, we look through a trauma-informed lens and we say, would this be comfortable for a family who might be less, who might have language barriers or who might be less comfortable verbally expressing themselves? We might want to think about an icebreaker that's related to drawing. One that I love is to choose an object in the room, draw it with your eyes closed, and then hold it up and everybody tries to guess what you were drawing, right? Like that's a way, same as we would differentiate for our students, we want to think about, differentiating for our families when we come together. Any icebreaker questions you all love? Go ahead and pop those in, and because I'd love to see what comes up. Megan, I know we call you the queen of the icebreakers, but do you have a favorite?
Yeah, I think one thing that is always fun is, imagine that you get a phone call right now and you're being picked up for the airport in 20 minutes. Time and money are no factor. Where are you going? That's a fun one that folks love to answer because it's, it varies on different times of the day or where you're at in your life. But to your point, to make sure that we're fitting, I'm thinking back to the days of when I was teaching. First grade is the best grade. If you worked with me, you've heard me say that. I always wanted to make sure I had opportunities for folks to respond in various ways, whether it was through, talking, writing, so on and so forth, to make sure that fits everyone's learning styles.
I'm
Rebecca,
loving
while
these.
folks are putting in their
We're actually getting a lot of great
we
ideas.
are.
Yeah, I'm
Can
gonna
you
just read
answer
a
a quick
couple of out.
question?
So 5 minutes, a box of objects. What could you build with these things and what would it do? This is a great, like, you've got the nonverbal portion of it and the verbal portion of it. There was a great penny icebreaker. Everyone gets a penny. Participants share a good memory from the year on their penny. We've got another one, like me. Everyone stands up with something that's said that applies to them. We play a similar one as our at company wide, actually, to help bridge internal connections. What animals are so, right? Like, what animal are you like? These are all really wonderful, and definitely keep them coming. A couple other things we can consider doing if we're hosting workshops is to do some storytelling. Personal stories are a great way to humanize yourself as an educator. I was at a talk once and the presenter said, tell your best story of your worst parenting moment if you really want your families to connect with you. And I remember that. And I've always held that in my mind and often utilize it. Also, another way to really build comfort and trust among families right off the bat and apply that sort of trauma-informed inclusive lens is to really make sure that when families walk into your space, they're able to see themselves. So, their traditions, their culture, their home language, and of course, obviously, interpreters and translators are critical to this. Another wonderful way to kind of start in a strength-based way and kind of act against some negative associations that may be getting in the way of trust are to immediately share wins with families. It can be tiny. One thing I used to do as an educator is I would choose 3 kids to just report out on a win on each day. And it was tiny. Marcus put his folder away today. uh, he was a real role model for the rest of the class. Getting these, as you know, if you've ever gotten one as a parent, it gives you a sense of pride, but it also, I think, helps to elicit the feel good response that is the bedrock of trust. I mean, a huge foundation of trust is feeling like you belong. So feeling like your child is successful in school gives that sense of belonging. So sharing early wins also makes it a lot easier when we do have hard things to talk about with families to really do that later on down the line, because we've built the foundation of trust in order to make that happen. All right, moving on.
Rebecca, can you answer a quick question we got into
Yeah.
today? Someone had said, when you say scaffolding, do you mean a simplified version of the offering or a step-by-step clarification? I thought this was an important one to address in the moment.
Yeah, it would really depend upon what the particular resource or offering is. So a perfect example, let's say I was emailing a family and about a child who was absent, and I said, please call the school. Your child was absent today and we need to know why, for example. That would be an email that is completely lacking in scaffolding, right? If I don't know the number to call, right? I don't know what information to give to call. It's a scary thing to reach out. So scaffolding would also be letting that person know in that message, like, you're not in trouble. We just need to be able to, we want to support great attendance and uh, need to keep track of, how we can do that by chatting with you about why your child was absent. This is obviously way too verbose, but I think it's always a matter of looking at whatever the communication or resource is and thinking about potential barriers to engaging and then layering in scaffolding. So sometime it may be offering a simplified version. I would say, though, that as a rule of thumb, we all benefit from simplified versions. Cognition decreases when we're stressed, and we're all stressed. So our messaging, for example, goes out at a third grade reading level and in 160 characters. So the simpler, the better. But as part of that, right, we always want to acknowledge where information is missing. Um, and those are the moments where we really want to add in scaffolding. Hopefully that answered the question, but feel free to pop another one in if it didn't. All right, so active listening is another huge trust builder. It has been coined the secret sauce of family engagement. And when we say active listening, we're really meaning intentional listening. So it involves, right, preparing yourself to listen, noticing I am in a moment where I'm going to set things aside and give families my attention. It's cueing that you are listening in whatever culturally appropriate ways that may be, whether it's nodding, whether it's eye contact. And then it's also saying back some of the things you've heard a family say and asking, did I get that right? And then asking those wonderful open-ended questions that give families the opportunity to share more. I think if we can be active listeners early and often, we are really setting the stage for trusting relationships. And when you think of the trusting relationships in your life, I imagine one of the first qualities that comes to mind is good listening, someone who really hears you. I put one question up here that we love to ask as a way to just elicit an open conversation. What are your hopes and dreams for your child? Oftentimes, families aren't asked this question, right? It's a vulnerable question, but it's so important. It's important to us as educators. It signals that we're really going to be responding to this family's sort of unique needs and their vision for their child's future. I will say also that active listening is one of the best ways to diffuse a situation where trust has been eroded. Oftentimes, when trust is eroded, it's because a family has not felt heard, they have not felt held. And so, taking that moment, pausing, setting aside distractions, and really listening to that family is going to go a long way towards rebuilding trust. One of the questions I love in this context is, what would you like to see happen in this moment? Especially if there's been some kind of conflict. Or what does success look like? Or what are the next steps that you see happening? All right, if we go on to the next slide. All right, we also want to look at our entire sort of arc of the year and think about how we can extend listening throughout every possible experience, whether it's having a little note at the bottom of homework asking, how did it go? Thumbs up, thumbs down, right? Putting comment boxes in the front of your school so that parents can offer feedback, and maybe changing up the questions to elicit that feedback. We want to make sure that, like, we're not just listening once. We're not just listening at conferences. We're not just listening when there is conflict. We want to make sure that parents and caregivers have opportunities to share feedback and insights on their child all year long. We have a resource on active listening that we're going to share with all of you because it really is such a foundational element of trust. And so you can actually utilize this with your families. It positions them as active listeners with a focus on adolescence. And what I'll say about this is the more we can get families listening actively to their children, the more information they're going to have to share with us so that we can partner in support of children. All right, next slide. We don't just want to listen to families, right? We want to consistently be demonstrating that we heard them and that what they said matters, right? If you'll notice think back to the beginning of this webinar, that one of the first things I said was, we're talking about trust because at the end of our last community of practice, we asked what you wanted to talk about. You said trust, so we're doing trust, right? It's just a small little example, but we put up some sentence frames. When families influence your decisions, right? And this is in a true homeschool partnership, this is happening all the time. We just want to make sure we're consistently letting them know, because you shared this thing changed, or this thing happened, or together we collaborated on this. As a team, we decided this. We heard from you that you care about this, or you wanted this to change. And so this thing changed, right? This is where we really get into the partnership element, and families really feeling the efficacy that is theirs, right? So assuming we've built trust, we're really able to engage families as partners. And this is a way that we can really demonstrate to them that their voices matter and that we are in a partnership and a collaboration. All right, next slide. Okay, offer ongoing windows and doors. This is a really critical strategy for building trust with families. So research has found that trustworthy people, especially leaders, tend to be transparent in their decision making and motivation. I love this quote, and I think about all the times that as a parent, I've been let into what is happening in the classroom, or I've been let into the thinking behind a decision. And it always makes me feel so much more of a partnership with my children's schools or districts. So we want to think about, like, what are all the ways to offer ongoing windows and doors into what is happening in the classroom, because that is going to breed trust, right? There isn't this sense that there are these walls and they're impenetrable, which can make families feel very unsure about what's happening. So whether that is walkthroughs of the school, at your family workshops, really having students learning and samples of their work visible in the fabric of your building, giving newsletter updates. Also, one of the things that I really, really love is when we create spaces to bring families together to watch the learning happen in front of them. So is there a workshop that students can lead, right? These are all opportunities to peel back the curtain and say, here's what's happening in school. Our program is 52 weeks of this, right? We are always saying, here's what your child is learning in classroom, and here are ways that you can support this learning at home. We also want those windows and doors to go the other way, right? We want families sharing with us, here's what's happening at home. Here's what I want you to know about my child, because that's how we're going to create the conditions for really wonderful learning to happen all year long. All right, on the next slide, I just wanted to end by saying, as we really establish trust with families, we get to really leverage families as leaders and bring them into these collaborative positions more and more. And we want to make sure that we are investing in shared leadership, that families have places to go, to come to the table, right? To have their voices heard, to influence decisions, whether that's parent policy councils, um, affinity groups, uh, how are families helping to make decisions? So we always want to be evaluating the decisions we're making and ensuring that families are really at the table where those critical decisions are being made. I think something to note is like families can't help with all decisions, and it's okay to say we can't hear your voices in this matter, but here are all the ways we can, or more eloquent than that, but basically this notion that like we can be very clear on where the joint decision making is happening. All right, Megan, I know I just shared a lot. I want to make sure that folks have a chance to kind of not only ask questions but respond to some of the questions that you put forth to the group. So hoping you can reiterate some of the things you had asked about in the lead up to this meeting.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you, Rebecca. Much appreciated. I couldn't help but just revisit my time as a teacher and thinking about all the things I could have been doing to support that trust building with families, right? I think, we can always do more. Not to say that the things are currently doing are, not great, because they are. But there's always room for more. And so folks, if you didn't see, I put a message in the chat. I did enable talking for everyone because we realize our settings for this webinar are a bit wonky with chat and video. And so feel free to come off chat, share any immediate thoughts or feedback around this topic of building trust. I'm also going to pop in the first question that I think could spur some thinking into the chat. So I will do that now. And so the first one that we really want to think about is, let's make sure I send this to everyone. How does your organization practice everyday trust building with your families? Folks, these were questions that we sent in the initial invite emails to you. So hopefully you've had a chance to think about these. But what are some of those strategies or, items you're doing to practice everyday trust? We'd love to hear that. As I said, you can pop in and chime in through talking, or go ahead and post in the chat box. All right, I see a few people coming off of mute. Anyone willing to pop in how your organization practices everyday trust building? And what I'll do, folks, I'll layer the next two questions on very, very soon. And so Joetta, it looks like you guys are holding monthly family share and feedback sessions. Yes, love that. We know that feedback loop in both directions is very, very important. Angela, greeting families at the door in the morning. That's probably the standard every single morning. And I know folks definitely appreciate that. When families walk up, they like to see the, familiar faces and know that routine. Aaron, everyday conversation. How are you? The kids, I noticed this is different at the door, on the bus. So yeah, you're taking those different points in the day to use those as trust building opportunities. Rhonda, love it. By simply keeping our words or promises, providing services as stated in our mission. Yeah, really dialing it back to as a core mission, the core mission of your organization. What are you committed to doing, and keeping that fluid. Monthly book reading nights, parent meetings, parent trainings. I do hope, folks, that as you see these responses flow through the chat, that hopefully you can pick one of these up and try something new. This is something that we hope that you get from these meetings. inviting parents to sit on committees such as PBIS and give survey feedback after visiting the building. Yes, I'm seeing a lot of feedback in here. So we know that is very, very important. Create room for everyone's voice to be heard. Karen, I could stop there. That is such a hard-hitting sentence right there. In terms of, retention. Oh, love that you mentioned that. And then giving the data points there. Yeah, again, all great ways to build trust. The proof is in the pudding. The proof is in what has lasted thus far. All right, folks, what I'm going to do now, Rebecca, there is just so many responses in the chat there. If anyone wants to come off of mute and speak, go right ahead. One thing we'll do next time in our next Communities of Practice webinar, we'll make sure that everyone automatically has video and audio settings. Human error this time around, we'll fix it and make it better for next time. All right, folks, and so last couple of questions. I'll pop them into the chat. What challenges is your organization facing in helping families to build comfort and community with each other? What strategies help your organization heal a breakdown in trust between schools and families? So the first, really facilitating the comfort and community with each other in terms of your families. And then when you do have a breakdown, because we all know they happen, what strategies are you using to heal? And so would love to hear some strategies there. Like I said earlier, it's, as educators as a whole, we love to take and spin, right? And so would love to get some new ideas here, take them to practice in our own organizations. I know I did that well as a teacher myself. And folks, don't let these questions limit you. If you have anything else that you want to discuss or, provide feedback on, go ahead and pop that in. Phyllis, I can't help but think your comment there, coming out of the COVID pandemic, posted many challenges. Absolutely. I could go on for hours about the pandemic and being in a brand new school district with my kids and trying to, facilitate relationships with the teachers and the administrators and other families. But yeah, I think the COVID, the pandemic posed many challenges that we're still dealing with today.
I see a great question. Our organization anticipates having native Spanish speaking families. How can we make them feel comfortable and a part of the community at large? So this is a wonderful question, and one that actually can benefit from many of the strategies we talked about, right? So really making sure that we're scaffolding engagement, that all of the materials are going home to families in their home language. So it would be really having translators look at all the communication that's going home to families, also not necessarily assuming that families will be able to read the communication. So what are other ways that we can get it into families' hands, whether it's a home visit or collaborating with a resettlement agency or some of your care providers around verbally communicating about your school, about expectations, helping families to register their children for school. Then when we get into building comfort in your actual building, right, it's walking through your halls and saying, how are families feeling represented? Look, what are the opportunities to show families that this is a place for them? So on a really basic level, you'd want to look at your signage at the front of your school. Is it clear how to enter the building? And are we letting families know in both English and Spanish? Is the person who answers the phone at the front desk also offering up translation services? Are your welcome signs in both English and Spanish? Are the books on your shelf in family's home language? I know that you will be reading, of course, oftentimes in English, but if children are bringing books home, it is so wonderful for them to be able to bring books home, like in a lending library situation, that are in their home language. If you've got music playing in your school, are you able to play music from the cultures that your children have come from? It's also understanding when any family is new, how do they think of education? Because it may be that they had very different experiences with it in their home country. So, like, was family engagement a thing? It could be that it wasn't a big deal to be absent in the home country. So we want to look at these things and say, okay, how do we really orient families around the expectations of our school? And especially as it relates to family engagement, letting families again know like why it matters, how it matters. And of course, we show them it matters by consistently eliciting feedback, by collaborating. When we make a promise to a family or we say we're going to follow up, we want to do that work always and make it a priority. Also, are there opportunities to bring families together with the community? So affinity groups can be wonderful for this. You may consider giving up a gymnasium to host, uh, an event for your Latin community, for example. That's just a way of, in general, bringing families into your building and building comfort outside of the typical school day. Another thing you might want to do is make a point of showing up where families are gathering. If it's a soccer game, if it's a festival, um, those can be wonderful opportunities to just begin building visibility.
Thank you, Rebecca. Yeah, I can't help but think of my own experience right now in school. We have a lot of Spanish speakers in my son's classroom. And so we have a parent group that the school set up. And they asked us, when you are sharing information with the group, can you please provide in English and Spanish? But it really was like a new muscle that we all had to build, whether your primary language is English or Spanish. But now it's just made it such a much more robust group since we're all putting in that effort. Rebecca, we got a question. You know, Great question. When building trust, is there a clear line between transparency and oversharing? Like, is there a point at which they see too much behind the curtain and lose trust? This is a meaty one.
That's a great question. I actually would love to put it out to the group. What does everybody think? Is there a line? How do you navigate that line? I know when I've crossed it. I definitely think we've all experienced, I think personally and professionally, moments when we've overshared. So we know what it feels like in the moment. Um, I think we always, of course, want to maintain our professional relationships. But are there any thoughts on ways to kind of recognize that invisible line and make it a little bit more visible? Okay, so I see one. Yes, sharing should increase incrementally as a relationship does. Absolutely. I've actually had this experience. So I grew up doing theater, was always very comfortable expressing myself. And I remember coming into a family workshop and wanting to do leading with a theater icebreaker. And I could tell immediately that it made families very uncomfortable because I hadn't built that trust. And I was asking them to be silly and goofy in front of each other. And it really didn't work. And it actually eroded trust because everybody felt vulnerable and uncomfortable in not a good way. Um, Transparency is all good, but there are back end things that shouldn't be shared with the public. Absolutely. And I think it's good to collaborate as a staff around what those things are. I think it's also really important how we message on some of those more vulnerable topics and making sure that we're putting our communication in front of many different sets of eyes. In publishing, there's something called sensitivity reads, right? You which really have to do with when a communication is going out, putting it in front of someone who's had that lived experience, who might be able to look at it and say, is this too much? Is this going to be off-putting to families or make families feel vulnerable? So I think really having those trusted advisors in your circle so that you can vet things with them and really look at a very nuanced level around about like how this is going to come across to families. Always be aware of your audience. Yes, exactly. Taking time to build relationships, include awareness of your family's interests, comfort, etc. Absolutely. And honestly, that goes back to the trauma informed lens as well, because sometimes if we overshare, we activate a stress response in families and we risk re-traumatization. So we always want to be mindful of how we're communicating and what we're communicating. Absolutely.
All right, thank you, Rebecca. And folks, we appreciate all the wonderful, robust comments in the chat today around building trust with families. We are going to wrap things up now, and I can't help but take a message from Erin Campbell, who said, there is a line, I've crossed it, but it was all a learning experience. So yeah, when it comes to trust building, you know, if that line is being crossed at any time, can we all be like Erin and make it a learning experience for all involved? And so I hope that you've gotten some new information, some new ideas today. Maybe it's strengthened some knowledge that you already have. But folks, we will be in touch with the follow-up, including the recording of this video. And then we'll be in touch with the upcoming webinars as we are going to continue these down the road. And I can promise in the next one, everyone will be able to enable video and audio on their own. We will fix that up. We apologize for that today. But thank you for allowing us to be part of your day, and we will see you very, very soon. Bye, all.
Take
Thank you.
care.